Hello, 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 Scorpio. I am Poetic Heretic, and this is your September 2020 astrology forecast, where we take a look at the most significant astrological developments of the month and interpret them for your sign. Now, this month we are doing things a little bit differently in that I do not have a written report in front of me, but instead I am interpreting each chart in real time that we'll be going over this month. So that should be interesting. Also, I want to remind you again that readings like this or videos like this will be most accurate for your rising sign. So I recommend using these primarily for your rising sign, but you may also, of course, use them for your sun or moon sign if you would like. That is perfectly fine as well. So with that said, let us begin. On screen right now, we have a chart for the end of the month, and the reason we're looking at the end of the month first is because that is when the Mars-Saturn square perfects, and this is an aspect that is basically active all month, and we need to understand it first and understand that this is happening constantly if we are to understand everything else that is happening this month. Everything else must be understood within the context of this. So last month, of course, I talked about Mars' extended stay in Aries, how it will be there for about 5-6 months, and how there's this extended review process for each sign of that particular area of their life, and how it's, I think I talked about how it's making these squares, but that is specifically what we have here with September. So as Mars is slowing down to station retrograde, which it does this month, September, it is entering into this holding position more or less in these late degrees of Aries, about 25 to 27 degrees of Aries. And as it is holding its position there, it is square to Saturn at the same time. And so this is a very difficult, stressful, frustrating configuration, and we're all feeling it, and it's constant throughout the entire month of September. And so indeed, Mars in Aries wants to push forward into the new, wants to take action now, wants to be spontaneous and impulsive. Saturn in Capricorn says, no, you must wait, you must do it the right way, you must stop, you must slow down. And so it's this extremely frustrating start, stop, or stop, go energy that we have going on. Now, for you, Scorpio, this Mars extended stay in Aries is taking place in your 6th house of your work, health, schedule, day-to-day activities. And so it is that part of your life that is experiencing this extended review at this time. However, for the Mars-Saturn square specifically, were we to delineate that, well, first of all, I should remind you that we're not going to see the outcome of this anytime soon. This doesn't end once September ends, but we will eventually see the outcome of it, and so this is what we have. For you, Scorpio, this aspect is a stressful situation involving focused action, motivation, desire, or willpower, as well as obstacles, limitation, authority, or the facing of a difficult reality that is taking place in the area of your work, health, schedule, or day-to-day activities, and or your communication, short distance travel, or that which is familiar to you, that is pushing you into new areas of activity. And those new areas, as well as the areas most likely to end up being affected by this very difficult transit, are you personally, your work, health, schedule, day-to-day activities, your communication, short distance travel, or that which is familiar to you, and or your home and family life. So numerous possibilities there. But remember, we are in the thick of this right now. We're in the thick of it, and we're not getting out of it anytime soon. And so mainly what we can expect to experience this month is that frustration of the Mars-Saturn square, and it's really important that we discipline ourselves to not push forward right now, to not go against the ways that we would normally discipline ourselves, or the regulations or whatever. We need to exercise patience and caution, because Mars is not really in a position to overcome Saturn at this time. And so it'll pay off in the long run if we can restrain ourselves, essentially, and stay disciplined and do things the right way, rather than giving into our impulses to try to push forward before we are truly ready. So keep that in mind. Let's see, what else? Is there anything else with this before we move on? Not really. Just remember that, again, everything that we go over this month in this video must be understood within the context of this background frustration with Mars square Saturn. I guess one other thing we could say about it is that if you do feel a lot of frustration this month, one thing that maybe can be helpful with that is knowing that that is perfectly normal under these conditions. That is not a sign that anything has gone wrong. In fact, that is what any astrologer would expect to be the case right now. So with all of that said, let us proceed to our first major event this month in sequential order, and that is the full moon in Pisces on September 2nd at 1:22 a.m. Eastern Time. All times in this video, by the way, are Eastern Time. Adjust your time zone accordingly. So the full moon in Pisces is on one level emphasizing the contrast between the sun in earthy practical Virgo and the moon in dreamy mystical Pisces, the contrast between reality and fantasy. But in addition to that, we notice that the full moon is co-present with Neptune, the modern ruler of Pisces, in Pisces. And so that's adding another element of dreaminess, imagination, spirituality, the supernatural, the non-physical, all of this stuff. And we also notice that the full moon is in a very close sextile to Uranus in Taurus. And so there's also this element of excitement on the full moon, this element of electric energy. The air is sort of filled with not only this dreaminess, but this excitement for the new, this innovation, maybe even that which is sudden, shocking, or revelatory. And so that should be, I think, a fun full moon, hopefully, as long as we're not too stressed out by the other energies present at this time. It could be fun to escape from the very earthy, hardworking, practical Virgo energy for a day or two or three or four, and let our minds and imagination go wild, at least to some extent. Now, later that same day at 8:19 a.m. Eastern Time, we also have Venus opposite Saturn. Now, this creates an interesting contrast between the full moon and this aspect, because now we're going from, now we have, in addition to the dreamy, mystical, mysterious energy of the full moon in Pisces, to this somber, serious energy of Venus opposite Saturn. So it's going to be very interesting to see these two very different energies like play out at the same time. Now, wait one moment, going back to the full moon. I don't think I mentioned, I apologize to your Scorpios out there, I don't think I mentioned yet for the full moon that it also takes place in your fifth house. So for you, Scorpio, you can expect things to come to a head in the area of your creative self-expression. That is the fifth house. And the fifth house is also your love, fun, romance, risk-taking, children, gambling. Anything that you create is a fifth house matter. And so the full moon is where things come to a head. And so indeed, you can expect things to come to a head on and around September 2nd in the area of your creative self-expression. Now, back to the delineation for Venus opposite Saturn. This is someone or something challenging you in the area of your communication, short distance travel, or that which is familiar to you, and or I should say your beliefs, spirituality, ideals, or that which is foreign to you, involving how you relate to others, as well as reality, limitation, obstacles, authority that requires you to make a decision in some way, and that most likely ends up affecting how you spend time alone or your enemies, your major relationships, your communication, short distance travel, or what is familiar to you, and or your home and family life. So a lot of possibilities here. Now notice also though, in addition to all of that, that as Venus opposes Saturn, both Venus and Saturn are square Mars. So Venus is in fact activating, triggering that Mars square to Saturn that we've already been over. So this is adding more potential for anger, frustration into this overall event. However, the good news is that Mercury at the same time is applying to a sextile to Venus and a trine to Saturn, thus indicating that it is quite possible that it is through Mercury things, it is through, therefore, communication that we may find a way out of these otherwise very difficult developments. We can find resolution through communication at this time, in other words, theoretically. Also on that note, Venus is not in great condition at all right now, being in hard aspect to both Mars and Saturn, but fortunately, give it another week or so and Venus will escape into Leo and thus be in aversion to Saturn and in soft aspect to Mars. And so that should help at least to some extent. Next, we have on September 11th at 4:20 p.m. Eastern Time, the Sun opposite Neptune. So this too is emphasizing that contrast between the Sun in earthy practical Virgo and Neptune in dreamy mystical Pisces, the contrast between reality and fantasy. But more specifically, this is again someone or something challenging you, Scorpio, in the area of your friends or social group and or your creative self-expression, involving your ego or sense of self and fantasy, illusion, spirituality, or creativity that requires you to make a decision and that ends up affecting, most likely, your career or public image and or your creative self-expression. So very interesting stuff there. However, in addition to all of that, the Sun at the same time is also making powerful trines, as you can probably see on screen, to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in Capricorn and your third house. So the trines are breakthroughs. And so you can also expect around the middle or so of September, breakthroughs involving with Jupiter, an expansion of your worldview with Pluto, deep emotional experiences or inner transformation with Saturn, obstacles, limitation, reality, authority, or the facing of a difficult reality, breakthroughs involving those things. And again, with that Capricorn conglomeration being in your third house, a lot of this is also likely, very likely, taking place in the area of your communication, short distance travel, or that which is familiar to you. Next, we have on September 17th at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, the new moon in Virgo in your 11th house. So this is a very earthy and practical new moon because it is in earthy practical Virgo. The new moon marks the new beginning of a month-long lunar cycle, and the nature of the new moon is the flavor, essentially, of that month-long cycle that follows it. And so the flavor of this cycle is indeed very down to earth, very practical, and that is made so even more by the powerful trine that this new moon is into Saturn, make it real Saturn. Saturn very much interested in reality. So this new moon is really very anchored in the physical realm. Now for you, Scorpio, with it taking place in your 11th house, you can expect new beginnings in the area of your friends or social group. And with the trine to Saturn in Capricorn and your 3rd house, breakthroughs in the area of, yet again, your communication, short distance travel, or what is familiar to you. So that is what we have there. The final aspect we'll be looking at this month is none other than Mercury opposite Mars on September 24th at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time. So first of all, this is an aspect where we do very often see arguments, conflicts, angry words, angry exchanges, this sort of thing. For you, Scorpio, this is a situation where someone or something is challenging you in the area of how you spend time alone, or your enemies, and or your work, health schedule, or day-to-day activities involving communication or what you write, study, think, or talk about, as well as focused action, desire, motivation, or willpower that requires you to make a decision and that most likely ends up affecting your friends or social group, your partner's money, business, or issues of life and death, you personally, and or your work, health, schedule, and day-to-day activities. So quite a bit to work with right there. I'm doing this all in my head if you can't tell. So if I pause for a moment, that's why. Now, in addition to all of that, this Mercury-Mars opposition is square to Saturn. They are both square to Saturn. And so that adds an additional element of having to deal with obstacles, limitation, facing of a difficult reality, feeling the oppressive weight of Saturn here. However, on a deeper or somewhat deeper level, what's interesting about this configuration is that in medieval astrology, this is what we would call accepting the management. Specifically, Saturn here is accepting the management. And when a planet does that, it acts as some kind of judge or intermediary or something of that nature between the other planets, and in this case, between two opposing parties represented by Mercury and Mars. And so what I see this most likely manifesting as for many people is some kind of authority figure mediating a conflict between two opposing parties. Now, for you, Scorpio, Saturn, remember, is in your 3rd house of communication, short distance travel, that which is familiar to you. And so quite possibly someone in that area of your life will act as that authority figure that mediates between two opposing parties or whatever they happen to be, two opposing people or groups of people, perhaps. Interestingly enough, the 3rd house can also include siblings. So maybe even if you have siblings, one of your siblings could act as a mediating figure between two opposing parties. And the conflict / argument that we see here with Mercury and Mars, again, might not even be you, Scorpio, but it could instead involve people that you're aware of, just people in your life are fighting or are at odds for some reason, and it's affecting you in some way. So always remember with stuff like this that, I mean, unless an astrologer like myself says, yes, this may be you personally, it could very often be like other people in your life that you are aware of. And in fact, in this particular chart, well, it does have your traditional ruler Mars involved, but other than that, it's taking place in other areas of your life. And so I'd be tempted to say that for many of you, this is not involving you. It is involving people, just like people that you are aware of. So that is what we have there. So that's about it, Scorpio. That brings us to the end of our forecast. To try to sum up this month of September, it is definitely not an easy month. There are many challenges to overcome indeed. I go back to that Mars Saturn square, especially. It's very frustrating. There's a lot of stressful energy. We're really being pushed hard right now, and it's difficult to move forward, even though we want to move forward. But this is the reality of the challenge that we face, and it is much better to be aware of the situation, and thus, therefore, be able to deal with it effectively than to be unaware of it and be unable to deal with it effectively. And that is why I, as always, as Poetic Heretic, do not sugarcoat shit. I'm here to tell you the real story as I see it, to the best of my ability to objectively discern it. And so, do with this information what you will. But one thing I would say that I would recommend that you do not do is try to resist it or just want it to be over with or pretend it out of existence. This is a very real situation that we're all experiencing in our own way. And it is all happening, if you ask me, for a reason. And so it's much better to just go with it and work with the energy rather than try to work against it, which will just make things so much harder. So there you have it, Scorpio. That is your September forecast. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe, as I am always creating more content like this for this channel. Also, I want to say that I hope that despite the wretched astrological conditions this month, that you have a great month of September indeed, or at least as great of a month as you possibly can have under these wretched conditions. And thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.